Humanity has always prided itself on progress, on justice, on the idea that there are rules to the chaos of war. But what happens when those rules are not just broken, but shattered? What happens when cruelty becomes systematic and horror becomes policy? Tonight, we delve into the chilling reality of the Nazis' most infamous war crimes. These are not mere stories from history books. They are warnings. Warnings of what humans are capable of when hatred takes the wheel and morality is abandoned. Stay with us as we uncover 3 of the most haunting atrocities ever committed. But fair warning, what you are about to hear will be hard to forget. Our first stop is a name that echoes with terror even decades later: Auschwitz. The Nazis didn't just invent a camp. They designed a factory of suffering. Auschwitz wasn't just a place to hold prisoners. It was a core part of the Nazis' plan for what they called the final solution. But what does that mean exactly? Here, industrial efficiency met human destruction. By the end of World War II, more than 1.1 million people would lose their lives at Auschwitz, the majority being Jewish victims. Others included Romani people, Poles, Soviet prisoners, and anyone the Nazis deemed unworthy. But this wasn't just taking lives, it was about erasing entire identities. Survivors described the journey into Auschwitz as their first encounter with hell on earth. Trains packed with frightened people arrived daily. Families torn apart at the platform. Men to the left, women and children to the right. Most had no idea this was the last time they'd see their loved ones. The true horror lay in what followed. Gas chambers disguised as showers. Crematoria running day and night. Doctors performing twisted experiments under the guise of science. Names were replaced by numbers tattooed on flesh. And the individuality of a person was stripped away in moments. But why Auschwitz? Why this level of precision? Because the Nazis believed their ideology justified everything. They saw their victims not as people, but as obstacles to a perverse dream of racial purity. Auschwitz became the pinnacle of genocide turned into a machine. To this day, the camp stands as a monument, both a memorial and a warning. A place where you feel the weight of what hatred, unchecked, can accomplish. June 10th, 1944. The sun shone brightly over the small French village of Oradour-sur-Glane. By evening, nearly 650 men, women, and children were dead. The Nazis called it retaliation, but history calls it an atrocity. Oradour-sur-Glane was a peaceful town, untouched by war. But on that day, an SS division rolled in, claiming they were searching for members of the French resistance. What followed wasn't a search, it was a massacre. The men of the village were herded into barns and shot in cold blood. The women and children, locked inside the church, where the SS lit it on fire. Some tried to escape through windows, only to be shot down. By the time the SS left, the village was a smoldering ruin. This wasn't just violence, it was psychological warfare. The Nazis sought to terrify resistance fighters by showing what they were capable of. But what they created was something else entirely. A ghost town, frozen in time. To this day, the ruins of Oradour remain untouched, a chilling testament to a village erased in a single afternoon. But why target innocent civilians? Because terror was their weapon. Fear was their goal. Oradour-sur-Glane is a reminder that in war, it's not just soldiers who suffer, it's entire communities. Our final chapter takes us to one of the most controversial collaborations between Axis powers. Though Japan's Unit 731 is infamous in its own right, few know of the chilling parallels between its experiments and those of Nazi scientists. The Nazis didn't just commit atrocities on the battlefield. They shared knowledge and encouraged them elsewhere. In camps across Europe, Nazi doctors carried out experiments that defy explanation. Prisoners were exposed to extreme conditions, injected with lethal diseases, and subjected to surgeries without anesthesia, all under the guise of science. But the collaboration with Japan's Unit 731 added another layer of cruelty. Information was exchanged, ideas shared, creating a network of dehumanization. The experiments weren't just about medicine, they were about control. about seeing how far suffering could go before the human body gave out. These so-called doctors weren't healers. They were destroyers. They wanted to uncover secrets of the human body, not to save lives, but to improve weapons and strategies for war. The experiments ended with the fall of the Nazis, but the legacy lives on in the survivors who bore physical and emotional scars for decades to come. The crimes of the Nazis go beyond the battlefield. They aim to destroy not just lives, but entire cultures, entire ways of being. Their atrocities are a warning of what happens when hatred, fear, and unchecked power take hold. Today, the scars remain. In the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane, in the haunted halls of Auschwitz, and in the stories of those who survived, forever marked by humanity's darkest hour. We cannot change the past, but we can learn from it. We must remember, because forgetting is the first step toward repeating. Our next story brings us to the ravine of Babi Yar, a place that would become a symbol of unimaginable brutality. Situated near Kyiv in Ukraine, Babi Yar is the site of one of the largest mass executions committed by the Nazis during their invasion of the Soviet Union. It all began in September 1941, as the German forces occupied Kyiv. 2 days before the massacre, the Nazis distributed leaflets ordering all Jewish residents to report to a specific location. Carrying their belongings, they walked unknowingly to their deaths. These families, mothers, fathers, children, were told they were being relocated. What awaited them was not a new home, but a ravine that would become their grave. On September 29th and 30th, over 33,000 Jews were rounded up, stripped of their clothing, and led in groups to the edge of the ravine. As each group arrived, they were forced to lie down over the bodies of those killed before them. Nazi execution squads, led by the Einsatzgruppen, fired round after round into the helpless victims. The efficiency was staggering. Over the course of 2 days, the ravine was filled with bodies, layer upon layer. But this was not the end. In the weeks and months that followed, more groups were brought to Babi Yar. Roma people, Soviet prisoners of war, resistance fighters, and others deemed undesirable. By the time the Nazis retreated, the death toll had climbed to over 100,000. Babi Yar became a chilling example of how quickly human lives can be erased when hatred and obedience intersect. Today, the site is a solemn memorial, but for decades after the war, the atrocities committed there were overlooked, buried like the victims themselves. Some atrocities are remembered not for their scale, but for their sheer cruelty. Lidice, a small village in Czechoslovakia, is one such story. In 1942, the Nazis unleashed their fury on Lidice in retaliation for something its residents had nothing to do with: the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich. Heydrich was known as the Butcher of Prague for his role in orchestrating the Holocaust. When resistance fighters assassinated him in May 1942, the Nazis demanded vengeance. They sought not just justice, but terror, an example to crush any further dissent. And so they chose Lidice, a village of around 500 people. The decision was arbitrary. There was no proof that anyone in Lidice had aided the resistance. Yet, on June 10, 1942, German forces descended upon the village. The men were separated from their families and executed in groups. The women were sent to concentration camps, where most perished. The children? Some were taken to be Germanized, a cold term for forced assimilation, while the rest were sent to extermination camps. But the Nazis didn't stop there. Lidice itself was obliterated. Buildings were burned, rubble cleared, even the graveyard was desecrated. The village was erased from maps, its name meant to vanish alongside its people. Today, Lidice stands rebuilt, its ruins preserved as a stark reminder of the human cost of Nazi vengeance. The massacre of Lidice is a testament to the randomness of cruelty and the lengths to which the Nazis were willing to go to maintain their grip on power. 5 stories. 5 places forever scarred by the Nazis' crimes. Auschwitz, where genocide became an assembly line. Oradour-sur-Glane, where an entire village was silenced in hours. Unit 731, where cruelty masqueraded as science. Babi Yar, a ravine that swallowed tens of thousands of lives. Lidice, a name the Nazis tried to erase but instead immortalized in defiance. What do these stories have in common? They remind us of the worst humanity is capable of, yes, but they also remind us of the resilience of memory. Because as much as the Nazis tried to destroy, they failed to erase the truth. They failed to silence history. The atrocities committed by the Nazis during World War II stand as some of the darkest chapters in human history. Among their countless crimes, for infamous cases reveal the depth of their cruelty and the extent of their disregard for human life. Auschwitz represents the epitome of industrialized genocide. Designed to exterminate those deemed undesirable, it became the centerpiece of the Nazis' final solution. Over 1.1 million people, primarily Jews, were systematically murdered through gas chambers, forced labor, and brutal experiments. Families arriving at Auschwitz were torn apart at the platform, often unknowingly stepping into a death camp rather than a work camp, as they had been told. Survivors bore the physical and emotional scars of starvation, disease, and inhumane experiments, making Auschwitz a haunting reminder of genocide turned into a machine of destruction. In September 1941, near Kyiv, Ukraine, the Babi Yar ravine became the site of one of the largest massacres of World War II. Over 2 days, 33,000 Jews were led to the edge of the ravine, stripped of their belongings, and executed by Nazi death squads. Subsequent massacres brought the death toll at Babi Yar to over 100,000, as Soviet prisoners, Romani people, and resistance fighters were also murdered. The site stands as a grim testament to the Nazi policy of mass shootings, where entire communities were erased with ruthless precision. On June 10, 1944, the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane was transformed into a ghost town by an SS division seeking revenge for resistance activities. Claiming to be searching for partisans, the Nazis massacred nearly 650 residents. Men were executed in barns, while women and children were locked in a church that was set on fire. Those who attempted to flee were gunned down. The ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane remain untouched, a haunting memorial to the brutality inflicted on innocent civilians during wartime. In response to the assassination of Nazi official Reinhard Heydrich, German forces descended on the Czech village of Lidice on June 10, 1942. Without evidence of the village's involvement, the Nazis executed all men, deported women to concentration camps, and sent children to be either Germanized or exterminated. They obliterated the village itself, leveling buildings, and even desecrating its graveyard. Lidice became a symbol of the Nazis' blind vengeance and their attempts to suppress resistance through terror. These crimes reveal the extent of Nazi barbarity, showcasing their methods of systematic extermination, indiscriminate vengeance, and psychological warfare. Each site, Auschwitz, Babi Yar, Oradour-sur-Glane, and Lidice, stands today as a somber memorial, a stark warning of the consequences of unchecked hatred and power. Remembering these events is essential to ensuring that such horrors are never repeated.